Good evening. My name is Alex DeLucia, and I'm your host this evening for the premier broadcast this election season of Brookfield Today and Beyond. This evening, we have with us candidate for governor, Griebel. Thank you for joining us, Oz.
A pleasure to be here, Alex.
Today's broadcast is being brought to you by the Brookfield Republican Town Committee. Oz, I know the first question on everybody's mind is going to be, what does Oz stand for?
My full name is Richard Nelson Griebel, and my parents always called me Nelson. All my family did. And when I went to high school, it was the height of the Ozzie and Harriet Nelson television show. So it was a high school nickname that got applied as a freshman and it's stuck ever since.
I see. Okay. Well, that was not the answer I would have predicted, but great. Well, you were one of the you entered the race at a unique point. Why don't you tell us a bit about what motivated you to jump into the governor's race when you did?
Well, I work today for the Metro Hartford Alliance, which focuses, I've been there for 9 years, and it focuses on creating a vibrant pro-business, pro-job growth environment. And one of the things that's concerned me both in the 9 years I've worked there and the other years I've worked at prior at Bank of Boston and at McDermott in the chemical company in Waterbury is the diminishing loss of opportunity for people, the diminishing sense of prosperity in the state of Connecticut, principally manifested in two ways. The anti-business, anti-private sector attitude that gets reflected principally primarily at the legislature and to some degree by our current Attorney General, and the cost of doing business and the cost of living in the state of Connecticut, which really does diminish the opportunity for jobs and job growth.
I see. Well, why don't you give us a bit more then about your background, because
Sure.
I'm going to come back to that subject of jobs.
Oh, okay, sure. I'd be delighted to do that. As I said, I've worked for 9 years for the Metro Hartford Alliance. Prior to that, I spent 2 years with McDermott, which is a specialty chemicals company based in Waterbury. And then I spent 22 years with what was Bank of Boston, the last 6 of which I was here in Connecticut as president of our Connecticut and Western Massachusetts operations. And before joining the bank, I had spent 5 years in education and coaching, coming right out of college.
Oh, neat. Where did you coach?
I up at Worcester Academy in Worcester, Massachusetts, and then I coached some at the college level as an assistant baseball coach at Dartmouth, at Oklahoma, and Tufts when I went to law school, started law school at Oklahoma.
I am sure you have a lot of people who are envious of that opportunity. Well, now, I know, if I'm correct, you've never held public office.
Correct.
So how do you feel you're suited to be our next governor?
I think there are a couple things, Alex, that I've talked about on the campaign trail. Is I've been in the state 17 years, and I've built up significant relationships in 3 major areas. In the business community, certainly in the north central part of the state, but when I worked at Bank of Boston, we had operations around the state. I've chaired the Connecticut Transportation Strategy Board earlier in this decade. So my relationships there, I do a lot with some of the larger chambers of commerce in the state besides our own. So those relationships, I think, are very important. As a result of the work that we do at the Alliance, I have a lot to do with public policy, spend a lot of time at the Capitol, so I feel I have a very strong set of relationships there. And the endorsements I've received, for example, from former Congresswoman Nancy Johnson, Senator John McKinney, Andrew Rohrbeck, and Tony Guglielmo, are a reflection of work that those endorsements didn't come just because I threw my hat in the ring in January. And then the other area that I think is critical, where I have broad knowledge of Connecticut, is the amount of civic activity that my wife and I have been involved in. She's chaired the chapter, the Connecticut chapter of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. I've been heavily involved with the Bushnell Center for the Performing Arts. I mentioned the Connecticut Transportation Strategy Board, Northwest Catholic High School, Riverfront Recapture. And those relationships, I think, are going to be critical in making sure that we prevail in November. Whoever the Republican gubernatorial nominee is, and I expect to be that nominee, is going to have to appeal to a large number of Democrats and independents in order to win the election and help other Republicans get elected. And I think those relationships are going to be critical to that, and also going to be even more critical to changing the state back to where we want it starting next January.
Well, then let's start to get to some of the key issues facing our state right now. We've seen the challenges faced by the governor in New Jersey trying to get control of things. How do you propose we get the budget and the deficit under control here in Connecticut?
Well, I think there's some of the things that Chris Christie or Mitch Daniels of New Jersey or Mitch Daniels has done in Indiana is critical. I do want to say one thing about the most important thing about this campaign in the next 4 years. It is about jobs. Okay. It's about the 100+ thousand jobs we've lost over the last 18 to 24 months. and really trying to get back to pre-1990 employment levels, because if you go back to the 88, 89 period, you probably would have to increase jobs by about 160,000 to get back to when this state was really humming on all cylinders the last time. And the two things that I think are critical to getting jobs, to retaining jobs and growing jobs. One, and I'm happy to elaborate on this in a second on the spending, on the deficit side. It's really changing the attitude that I believe this state has, the anti-business, anti-private sector, anti-job growth attitude that, as I mentioned, is manifested by the legislature and the Attorney General. A governor of this state has to be, I've used the metaphor of being a hungry governor, that unless a governor of this state is hungry for jobs, for capital and talent, there are 49 other states out there who have governors who are hungry, who come into this state and recruit our companies, recruit our jobs, hold entertainment events at national trade shows for our businesses here. And unless a governor of this state sees himself as the principal salesperson, the chief economic development officer for the state, no one else is going to sell the state's assets. It's the most important asset is its very talented and highly productive workforce. That's something that's got to be sold. So the reason I start with that is we say we don't want to worry about revenue. We want to talk about spending cuts, which I will talk about. But we do have a revenue problem in the state, and that's with 100,000 plus people out of work, people who aren't paying income taxes, people who aren't paying sales taxes, people who may not be able to pay their property taxes. So job number one is changing the attitude towards the private sector here so that jobs will stay here, companies will want to invest here, someone will want to start a business here. That to me is job number one. The next thing is, in order to keep the business community here, you've got to attack the spending issue that you alluded to.
Well, let's focus then on the jobs. How do you see yourself changing? I mean, besides being the salesman for the state, how do you see yourself changing the attitude of the state, in a tangible way for business?
Well, I think that first of all, I've said that serving as a chief economic development officer means you're out there 6 or 7 days a week talking to businesses on a regular basis, either directly, whether it's the largest employers in the state, like a UTC with Pratt & Whitney, or it's a Pitney Bowes, or it's a Pfizer, all those larger employers who have major investments in the state, who have significant jobs, the Hartford, Aetna, all the insurance companies, making sure we understand what their needs are and see where the state can address those. The second thing is making investments in things that are important to the business community. Transportation is something I think there are 4 areas that I would spend a lot of management time in. Transportation, public education, economic development, and healthcare. And I'm happy to elaborate on any of those. But my point is that those are things, companies come to states or countries because there is low cost, but they also need amenities for their employees. They need a transportation system that works. They need a public education system that works. So for example, on transportation, making sure we have money to invest in our transportation system to maintain our roads and bridges, have mass transit. I would be a strong advocate for returning transatlantic service to Bradley Airport. We had it to Amsterdam at one point. I believe it sends a signal. Some things you do in life are symbolic. Words matter, symbols matter, actions matter. Even if you're not putting, say, major tax incentive programs together, you're demonstrating to the business community that you understand what they need, from the smallest business person here, who maybe employs 1 or 2 people, to those largest employers. So making those kind of investments, making those kind of commitments, and listening to the business community, I think, is critical. The other thing I would say to you is when legislation gets proposed, such as paid sick leave, the paid sick leave bill that's been introduced many times here through the committee structure, has not been approved yet. To me, that's an insertion of the state in an inappropriate place in business. Governor's got to stand up right away when the bill gets introduced and say that bill will be vetoed, so that the business community knows right away that they're not going to have to wait all the way to the end of the session to have that discussion. So it's those kinds of things that I think you need to manifest that pro-private sector attitude that's critical to job creation and retention.